Hello, and welcome to our next presentation. This is day 3 of the final day of the symposium. And on behalf of the MIT CDOIQ Virtual Symposium, we would like to thank all our sponsors who have sponsored the symposium this year. Please keep a lookout for a very special survey that we'll be sending out shortly. In the meantime, let me thank our sponsors, Deloitte Informatica, Privacy Analytics, DAWIX, Fusion Alliance, KPMG, Santel Consultants, Tamer, Elation, Ali Data, Big ID, Boomi, Caserta, Citizen, Data Kitchen, Garage, Okira, Pylog, Click, ThoughtSpot, Eckerson, Global ID, Snowflake, and Starburst. Please take a chance to go to Content Hub, see what content they have, download that, and if you get a chance, reach out to our partners. Without our partners, we would not be able to hold a symposium. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in 2021.
Hi, folks. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. We have a couple of interesting sessions left prior to the wrap of the conference, and hope that you will stay for the town hall at 4:30. I think Dr. Stuart Madnick is going to propose a call for participants with an interesting survey he's presenting. But today, right now, we're going to talk to Dr. Aleksandar Velkoski. He serves as the Director of Data Science at the National Association of REALTORS. In addition, he's an adjunct professor in the College of Computing and Digital Media at DePaul University and co-founder and organizer emeritus of Chicago ML, a community of machine learning scientists. Dr. Velkoski is going to present a conversation on artificial intelligence on delivering real-world business value. Dr. Velkoski?
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here today to be sharing a topic that's very important to me, and that is how we can leverage artificial intelligence in order to deliver real-world business value. So since there was already an introduction with respect to who I am and where I come from in my work, what I'd like to do today is focus on, first and foremost, an AI disambiguation. What are we talking about when we talk about artificial intelligence? I want to talk a little bit about the state of artificial intelligence today, and then we'll dig into a couple of real-world case studies of how the National Association of REALTORS is deploying artificial intelligence to deliver real-world business value. Then I'll highlight a couple of lessons learned, and then we'll go through a conclusion. And of course, I will be happy to take questions at the end of the presentation. So why don't we get started with the AI disambiguation? So AI has a number of different definitions. And when we're talking about AI in this presentation, I want to take more of a practical view to artificial intelligence. We know that artificial intelligence is a confluence of discipline. When we talk about AI, we can talk about a number of different things: machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision, machine reasoning, data science and analytics, robotics and sensors, statistics, and a number of other disciplines. When I talk about artificial intelligence today, I'm talking about, in practice, many of these concepts in a similar type of fashion. I'm talking about how we can leverage artificial intelligence to understand patterns in data so that we can make better decisions. That's something that can be thought of in the context of a traditional statistical domain, in the context of the data science domain, and of course in the context of the artificial intelligence domain. So when I'm talking about AI, I am talking about how we can leverage techniques and technologies in AI to help make better business decisions by understanding patterns in data and extracting insights from that data. So let's quickly talk about the state of artificial intelligence. So most of you have probably heard about and have seen the AI hype cycle. So the AI hype cycle is fascinating because what it does is it allows us to understand the nature of AI technology and where it exists on these curves of innovation productivity, and enlightenment. So when we're talking about artificial intelligence technology, we can be talking about a number of different things. Again, natural language processing, computer vision, artificial general intelligence. But a lot of times business leaders are not sure where they should be putting in their investments. So the AI hype cycle allows us to understand the nature of AI innovation and when and where we should be making AI investments. So let's take a look at a couple of different technologies that exist in the AI hype cycle. So you can see, for instance, artificial general intelligence on the left-hand side of the hype cycle, right around the innovation trigger. That tells us that we're in the very early stages of innovation in the context of artificial general intelligence. So if you are a risk-averse organization and you're thinking about where do I put my money in order to make a difference in AI, perhaps artificial general intelligence isn't the right place to start. We're at an innovation trigger, not necessarily at the plateau of productivity or even past the peak of inflated expectations. So a lot of those investments may end up not being fruitful. Then as we get closer to the peak of inflated expectations, we see a number of very interesting technologies like intelligent applications, digital ethics, AutoML, chatbots, which in fact we'll talk a little bit about here later in this presentation. With these technologies are getting a lot of hype in the marketplace. There are a lot of people that are talking about these technologies. And in fact, the expectations of what we think these technologies can accomplish are not necessarily aligned with the practical implications of how we can create value in our organizations. So there's a lot of hype, but not necessarily a lot of real world value creation at the peak of inflated expectations. That's not to say we cannot develop solutions that add value, but when we're hearing about these technologies, we need to moderate our expectations because they're at this peak of inflated expectations in the innovation cycle. Then we have the trough of disillusionment. So we can see we have technologies on the curve from the upper left-hand side now going down to the bottom, deep neural networks, machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision, insight engines, cognitive computing, and of course, autonomous vehicles. And then the slope of enlightenment all the way over to the right-hand side where we have the plateau of productivity with speech recognition and GPU accelerators, actually where businesses can generate the most value from these technologies. So when we're talking about how we should be deploying AI in our organizations, we should really be thinking about the technologies that are somewhere around the peak of inflated expectations through the trough of disillusionment and beyond. That's where we potentially have the biggest bang for our buck. In addition to the AI hype cycle, we have what's called the AI priority matrix, another wonderful solution that is provided by researchers at Gartner. And in the AI priority matrix, what we do is we can take the technologies that are available to us in artificial intelligence, those that we've plotted on the AI hype cycle, and we can examine the nature of those technologies in the context of the expected impact that they will have over the next 2 to 10 years. So we can see impact on the left-hand side from transformational at its best to moderate at its worst. And then of course, less than 2 years for the quickest and more than 10 plus years for those technologies that are still far out in terms of being able to deliver value. So of course, we see on the left-hand side, many of those technologies that we saw toward the plateau of productivity, speech recognition, GPU accelerators as an example. And we have those technologies associated to whether or not those technologies will cause, again, high or transformational change in our organizations. Then, of course, to the right, 2 to 5 years, transformational, we have AI-related CNSI services, augmented intelligence, of course, chatbots, which again, we're going to be talking about a little bit later in this presentation. Machine learning is another transformational technology that's available to us in the context of artificial intelligence, with an impact in the next transformational impact in the next 2 to 5 years. So technology that we really need to be thinking about in the context of our organizations and how we can deploy real world value. And then, of course, to the far right-hand side, artificial general intelligence with transformational expectations, but more than 10 years out until we can actually see what it is that we would expect to see from that technology in practice. So when we're thinking about, again, investing in technologies, we want to think about those technologies that are a little bit around or past the peak of inflated expectations toward the plateau of productivity, and those that have a more nearer term high or transformational impact. So again, chatbots and machine learning, a big component of this technology. Let's talk a little bit about the deployment status, because I think there's a lot of hype out there in the marketplace. There are a lot of people who are talking about actually implementing artificial intelligence in the business to drive real world value, but that doesn't necessarily align with what is happening in the industry. So here we have a survey that went out to folks that talked to them about whether or not they are deploying data science and machine learning today, and what their plans are to do so over the next several years across some disciplines. And you can see at the top of this graphic, we have research and development, of course, executive management, business intelligence, operations, marketing and sales, and of course, finance at the bottom. And you can see that the majority of those folks who are actually using data science and machine learning today, these are technologies within the context of artificial intelligence, are in the research and development domain. When we're talking about finance at the other extreme, we're talking about near or less than 16% of folks actually using data science and machine learning today, and 35% that don't even have plans to use data science and machine learning at all. So when you hear people talk about machine learning, artificial intelligence, and other related technologies, and actually being able to deliver value from them, the reality is that most organizations continue to struggle in using these technologies to drive real world business value. They continue to struggle with AI adoption within them. So we need to be realistic about what we can do with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and how we can go about actually delivering value for our organizations. And when people talk about doing so, we're not talking about doing so very broadly. We're talking about some niche areas of certain organizations that are able to do so effectively. And again, that is a very small group of folks still to this day. So let's talk very quickly about some of these barriers to AI adoption. So why are we running into trouble actually implementing artificial intelligence to drive real world business value? So here we've got a number of interesting topics that we need to consider. First and foremost, at the top under enterprise maturity is the skills of our staff. We still to this day have an issue with hiring talent that is capable of driving artificial intelligence innovation in our organizations. And we don't necessarily just think about the technical talent, because of course that is a major concern. We're also thinking about the talent in the organization higher up, let's say in executive management, that doesn't necessarily understand artificial intelligence to the degree that they need to in order to really identify how AI can be used in the organization to drive business value. And then, of course, with the technical expertise of those folks within the organization, actually execute to drive that value. So skills of staff at all levels is certainly a major barrier to AI adoption and delivering real world business value. Of course, data scope and quality is a huge issue. So we may have a lot of data in our organizations, but is it of the right kind and of the appropriate quality in order for us to really drive value? Because we may have a lot of data, but we may not have the right data to help us solve the business problems that we face. So we need to be conscious of the fact that just because we have data doesn't necessarily mean we have the right data to make a difference, or that our data is of good enough quality to actually render the insights that we derive from it appropriate to our problem. Governance issues and concerns. Most people who are part of this conference understand the limitations and the issues that are associated with not only data governance, but also AI governance in our organizations. Then we have, of course, the fear of the unknown. So understanding the AI benefits and use cases. This goes back to, in some way, shape, or form, the skills conversation. How do we know what type of value we can derive from artificial intelligence? What are those technologies that we should be focusing on that can help us actually drive value, and how we can apply artificial intelligence in the business to make a difference? Of course, there are security and privacy concerns, how data is being used, how it's being shared, even the insights that you derive from the data, how those are being used and being shared. Another interesting concern is around measuring value. So you may be able to come up with an AI use case. You may be able to deploy that use case, but how are you actually going to measure whether or not your organization is delivering value from artificial intelligence? Sometimes we have a difficult time connecting the dots between what it is that we have actually accomplished or implemented in practice and the real value that we derive from it. Sometimes it is not just the return on investment. Sometimes it can be and should be a focus on whether or not we are engaging our customers or members in our business the way that they need to be engaged. And sometimes that doesn't translate directly to a dollar figure. Of course, risk and liabilities. We have finding a starting point. So how do I actually know where to start? If I do not deploy artificial intelligence in my organization today, how do I know where to begin? What are, again, those use cases that we need to be able to identify so that we can take artificial intelligence and bring it forward? Defining our strategy, of course, goes back to executive leadership, having the skills and the understanding of artificial intelligence enough to be able to know when and where it can be used to drive value. Funding is, of course, very important, because if you do not have the funding to make AI investments, whether it is in people or technologies, then of course we have issues. And then last but not least, around vendor strategy, the integration complexity associated with those tools and services that are provided by third parties. And then of course, confusion over what the vendors can actually deliver, what are their capabilities versus perhaps what they say they're capable of doing. And sometimes those, of course, are not aligned. And even worse, sometimes you find out when it's a little bit too late. So once you hire a vendor or a service provider, bring them in, start developing the solutions, and unfortunately around that time is when you realize that you're not quite getting what you expected. So of course, those are continue to be barriers to AI adoption. Last but not least, I wanted to highlight the talent crunch. So of course you saw on the prior slide that skills were an important barrier to AI adoption. And we can see in this graphic that there is in fact a talent crunch. In 2015, there was a need, not just in the information technology domain, but also in other business areas for skills in the artificial intelligence domain. And there was a gap. Again, tens of thousands of people across both information technology and other business areas. And in 2019, that talent crunch got even worse, not just in the technology domain, but also in the business domain. And this is something that people tend to forget. We're always thinking about the technologists. We're thinking about how the technologists are going to implement AI technology, but we're not thinking about how the business, the type of skills that the business needs to have, including executive management, in order to take it to the next level and actually integrate and implement the solution in the business to make a difference, because that's a big part of actually being able to derive value. You could have the best technologists building amazing solutions for the organization, but if you're not capable of partnering with the business, and if the business is not up to speed, then a lot of those solutions may not be implemented more broadly in the business, and therefore may cause AI adoption to be low, and of course, AI innovation to fail. So there is a talent crunch, not just in the technology domain, but beyond that throughout our business. And that's something that we need to be aware of as we're thinking about how do we drive AI innovation for our organizations. So let's move forward to a couple of case studies on how the National Association of REALTORS is innovating through artificial intelligence. So I want to talk about the REALTORS Conference and Expo. So the Conference and Expo is the largest conference and expo, the REALTORS Conference and Expo, that is, in the world for real estate professionals. And the purpose of the conference is to really deliver values to our members who are realtors, those folks that are out there in the marketplace helping consumers buy and sell property, not only in residential markets, but also in commercial markets. So the purpose of the conference is really to think about governance, education, provide networking opportunities for those folks so that they can connect with the right people, and of course, learn about various vendors that are in the industry, helping realtors execute against their day-to-day objectives. So core purpose of the Conference and Expo is to deliver value. Now, our approach to this implementation of artificial intelligence was to try to understand the business itself. What are the business needs associated with the Conference and Expo? What's the data understanding that we need to have in order to be able to execute against our initiative? How do we prepare and actually build a predictive model, leveraging techniques in artificial intelligence to help make a difference? How are we going to evaluate those models and, of course, deploy them so that we can actually implement them from a technology perspective? And then last but not least, how can we start thinking about the greater implementation in the business? How are the business folks, the folks who are responsible for decision making, going to take what it is that we build and actually make a difference with it by helping them augment decision making, by adjusting processes and procedures and the like? So our approach really starts with business understanding and then, of course, ends with business implementation. So it starts with the business and it ends with the business, and the technology is the means by which we actually get the job done. So let's talk about the problem, first and foremost, that we faced with the REALTORS Conference and Expo. In an ideal situation, all of our members would attend the conference in order to take advantage of their educational and other opportunities that we provide so that they can enhance their network, knowledge, professionalism, and productivity. So in an ideal situation, all of our members should be attending the conference to receive the value that we provide from the conference. But the reality is that actually a small fraction of our active members attend the conference. So of course, there are some consequences. So in a worst case scenario environment, our members are of course active, but they're disengaged, which of course has implications for not only the members themselves and their individual productivity, but also for the much broader realtor ecosystem. So there is a gap, and we have to figure out how can we close that gap. So of course, our proposal from a business perspective is to identify a segment of members that are most likely to attend the Conference and Expo, to tap into their unique needs and preferences to, of course, encourage them to attend. And the reason that this was our proposal is we had to figure out a way to close the gap between, again, the ideal situation, which is every individual member attends our conference, and the reality, which is a small fraction do. So we have to figure out a way, how can we encourage members to attend the conference, to understand the value that conference attendance provides to them, and actually get them there. So by setting up this proposal, what we're capable of doing now that we understand the business problem is really defining what the technical solution is going to look like. So if I know I have to identify a segment of members that are most likely to attend the Conference and Expo, I have to start thinking about, of course, the underlying data. How are we going to design and develop our models? What are those insights going to be that we are able to derive from it. But again, it starts with business understanding first. So let's talk about our data for a minute. Our organization is reasonably complex, and we have data that exists in a lot of different places in the organization. We have data that exists in traditional Oracle database systems, in SQL Server. We have data that sits on folks' laptops via Excel spreadsheets, as an example. So we had to think through, as an analytical function, we had to say, what data is available to us across the organization? And how do we pull that data into one place in order to identify, first and foremost, how we can leverage that data to help make a difference to the business problem? Because remember, not all of the data that you have available to you is going to be relevant to the problem at hand. So we had to understand what data is there, pull it all into one place so that we can have a single, complete view of our member and their activity and their engagement. With that done, with having the data understanding and being able to pull it all into one place, then we can actually start thinking about how do we build models to help make a difference. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the data preparation and, of course, the modeling aspect of this particular problem. So most of you who have done some work in the analytical domain, particularly in the context of AI innovation, you know that when you have larger data sets, the data is not going to be perfect. The data is not going to be necessarily clean. And there is a lot of work that needs to go into how do we prepare our data in order to make it ready for modeling. So with knowing what data you have available to you and pulling it all into one place, you're now capable of understanding what data is relevant to the problem and beginning to learn about the actual characteristics of the data, the missing cases, the outliers, perhaps the errors in the data, whether it was input errors from an individual or otherwise. And needing to, of course, address those before you get into the process of building models. So we went through that phase, and of course, it took quite a bit of time to clean up the data and make it the way that it needed to be in order to build predictive models. So we went ahead and we built hundreds of different models with our underlying data and with, of course, our problem at hand. So how did we think about the design and the building of the models? We built essentially a classification model. We tried to understand, for those folks who actually attended the conference in the past, what could we learn about them? What could we learn about their behavior with the association, about their demographic and behavioral characteristics that can help us understand the nature of our target outcome, which is whether or not an individual actually attends the conference. So by having that historical data, we built hundreds of models to understand whether or not individuals were likely to attend the conference. And we selected a model that was, of course, an ensemble model, which happens to perform really well in a lot of classification problems like the one that we faced here in our organization. And with that model, we're able to make predictions about who is likely to attend, even if they've never attended in the past. So long as we had those characteristics that we used in the underlying model itself to build it, we could look at a member who has not attended and actually score them based upon their likelihood to attend. And you would approach this type of problem similarly across different domains as well. So let's talk about the evaluation and the deployment of the model. So in a classification model like the one that we had designed here, the output is a prediction score. So a score that tells you whether or not a member belongs to the positive case. And in this case, because we're talking about attending a conference, it is that the positive case would be yes, the member is likely to attend. The negative case would be no, they are not. We pick the classification threshold. And then we make a prediction for each and every single member that we have in our database system that tells us whether or not a member is likely to attend. If the member falls above a given threshold, then we would say, yes, they're likely to attend, and we can record that probability and keep that aside as well. If they fall below, then of course we'll code them as not likely to attend the conference. And perhaps we don't ignore those folks, but perhaps our strategy with those folks needs to be a little bit different, because we have identified now individuals that are more likely to attend the conference and expo. So of course we label those cases above positive, those below negative, and we deploy our model via an API so we can score each individual member with that model. Then once the members are scored, the members are available to us in a database system, which allows us to then actually look at a little bit more closely those folks who are predicted to attend and dig into their characteristics, their decision-making styles, their communication preferences, so we can really design a strategy to reach out to them and to communicate to them in an individual, one-on-one, unique way, with their unique interests and needs in mind. So let's talk about the key insights that came out of this analysis. So first and foremost, as I mentioned previously, we had an attendance score. That is to say, a score for each and every single individual member in our database system that never attended the conference, that tells us whether or not they are likely to attend. We identified approximately 1.5% of all active members in the database system who had a very high likelihood of attending the conference. And that was approximately 20,000 members. And of course, that was driven by our threshold. If we wanted to have a little bit more scale, we of course could have driven a little bit more scale by lowering the probability levels to a degree that allows us to get the volume of members that we were looking for. So we had about 20,000 members in this case that we predicted to be very likely to attend the conference and expo in the future. So what were those factors that drove conference attendance based upon our analysis? So first and foremost was engagement within the National Association of REALTORS and its core product and service offerings. So our results indicated that when individuals earn a designation or certification, they are more likely to attend the conference and expo. Now, our designations and certifications are a means by which realtors can learn new and interesting topics, like, for instance, how to deal with technology in real estate, how to deal with foreclosures, and other similar types of things. So if a member earns these credentials, if they take the time to go and to learn about a specific type of technology or issue in the real estate industry and get this credential, one or more of them, they're more likely to attend the conference. If they are involved in a committee in our governance structure, that is to say, if they are participating in helping us make decisions about the future of the real estate industry, then they are more likely to also attend the conference and expo. All of these insights, by the way, were very intuitive. You know, if a member was more engaged in one area of the association, perhaps they're more likely to also understand the value of the conference and expo. So this finding was one of those findings that actually fit in well with what we would expect to see from an analysis like this. Advocacy. So political activism and voting was another very important factor in determining whether or not a member would attend the conference and expo. In fact, members that were politically active were 2 times more likely to attend the conference and expo than those that were not politically active. And even this finding was one of those findings that actually made sense, because much of what we discuss at the conference and expo, especially in the context of our governance structure, is policy-related issues. We, of course, encourage all of our members to vote and to have a voice so that we can help make a difference in the real estate market. So it definitely made sense to us to see that political activism and being engaged in voting was related to conference attendance. And again, that was a finding that was very interesting to us and confirmed some existing knowledge. Some demographic characteristics that were interesting. I'll point one out here. Members without children present in the household were 17% more likely to attend the conference and expo than those with children present in the household. Now, what's interesting about this for those folks who are not familiar with the Realtors Conference and Expo is the conference occurs throughout the nation, different locations. This is, of course, pre-pandemic. And folks who wanted to attend the conference would have to, of course, if they're not in the location, if they're not living in or operating near the location where the conference is held, they of course have to travel to that location in order to participate in the conference. So yes, of course, if you have children present in the household, perhaps it's more difficult for you to navigate to a given location where the conference is actually being held. So this was one of those findings that, of course, if you thought about it, if you considered it, perhaps it was something that you would hypothesize, but it wasn't one of the hypotheses that were at the forefront of our minds when we set out to actually look at this project. It was one that once we saw the results, we said, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. It's complicated for a member to attend a conference and expo. It takes a lot of effort, it takes work. And if you have children present in the household, perhaps it is more difficult for you to attend. So this was a very interesting finding for us. And last but not least, another one of many other findings that we had in this project is that members who were engaged in business and finance activities were 55% more likely to attend the conference and expo than those that were not involved in business and finance activities. And this is, again, one of those intuitive type of findings that makes sense in the context of what we do, because at the conference and expo, much of what we discuss is, of course, the real estate markets, the real estate industry, what's happening in the industry. How can we be more productive as realtors? How can we help? How can we better assist home buyers and sellers? Of course, if someone has more engagement in business and finance activities, even investing, that they would be more likely to be interested in the content and the offerings of the Realtors Conference and Expo, and of course, engage with it. So another interesting finding, but again, a finding that did make sense in the context of the Expo and what we offer at it. So finally, I want to talk about business implementation again, because of course, business implementation is the most important part of what it is that we do with AI innovation. So we built this model. Well, let's go back. We identified the business problem, which was the fact that in the ideal scenario, we would want all of our members to take advantage of the conference and expo and all of the value that we're able to provide. But of course, only a smaller subset of folks actually do so. So that was our problem. And our technical solution was to examine the nature of conference attendance and predict who may be likely to attend the conference based upon patterns that we were able to observe from prior conference attendance. So now how do you actually take that? You've got your advocacy, you've got prior engagement with NAR, you know that that's important, you know that business activities are important. How do you take that to the next level and actually create a solution that can be implemented in the business to encourage folks to attend? So I'm going to talk about a campaign to give you two practical examples of one type of member segment in the database system called Discount Deadline Dave, and then of course another called Proud to be American Pam. We were able to dig into our data and identify the decision-making styles and communication preferences of the individuals that we had predicted to be likely to attend the conference. On the left-hand side, we of course have Discount Deadline Dave. This is an individual that belongs to the Show Me the Money segment and who's interested in being communicated with by brands via the direct mail communication channel. So the Show Me the Money segment is an individual that is interested in the best type of deal that they can find. So perhaps when we're talking to somebody like this, somebody like the Discount Deadline Dave, perhaps we can offer a discount on conference attendance, because again, they make decisions based upon the financial implication of those decisions. So perhaps we can reduce the financial burden for folks to attend the conference that are in this segment. And perhaps because they prefer to engage with brands via direct mail, we can communicate to them an offer to attend the conference at a discounted rate via their preferred method, which is direct mail. That is a practical implementation of how you go from the business problem, which is essentially folks not attending the conference and expo, identify folks who are likely to attend the conference and expo, and then understand their unique needs and preferences and communicate with them the way that they like to be communicated with by brands to encourage them to attend. Another great example of this was Proud to Be American Pam. So this was an individual that belonged to a segment that was called Look at Me Now, and of course the email segment. The Look at Me Now segment was one in which an individual was driven by the strength and quality of a brand. And of course, being part of the email communication preference segment means that the individual likes to communicate with brands via email. So for members that fit within this very specific segment, we could highlight the history, the strength, and the influence of the National Association of REALTORS and its brand. And we could do so via the email channel. So two distinct segments of members that were predicted to be likely to attend the conference, but with whom we could communicate based upon their individual needs, their preferences, so we can encourage them to actually attend the conference. And of course, that fits perfectly with our business problem, which was increasing conference attendance overall, which of course we were able to do with this project. In fact, we had the greatest response rate with the segment that we had predicted to attend the annual conference and expo versus a holdout group that we set aside to understand the nature of the performance of this campaign. So we had nearly $100,000 in incremental revenue that we were able to drive from these folks who had never attended the conference before, but for whom we had predicted likely to attend the conference. And that was a significant win, especially for a call to action that is, again, a little bit more complex than, let's say, your traditional, open this email type of call for action. Folks had to, if they did not live in the locality, actually fly to the location where we're holding the conference, secure a hotel room, stay away from their business for perhaps 5 to 7 days, and of course, pay the registration fee to be part of that conference. So the $100,000 in additional revenue, and of course, the underlying engagement that we were able to drive was significant. And of course, we would have considered this effort a huge success. So that's one use case that I wanted to talk about. More of the traditional predictive analytics use case, understanding patterns from data, making predictions, and of course, implementing those predictions in the business within, of course, the overall framework of AI innovation. Now, what I'd like to do is talk about a second case study. There are, of course, many others that we could discuss should you have time and be interested. Just feel free to reach out to me on the side and we can have this conversation. But I wanted to talk about our COVID-19 chatbot for a moment. Now, remember, the chatbot technology was very interesting because it still was around the peak of inflated expectations. So you'll notice we still invested in this technology. We still designed a solution that leveraged this technology, even though it was at the peak of inflated expectations. And the reason we did so was because we saw the value in being able to give content about COVID-19 and its impact on real estate to our members in a new and innovative way without having to search in depth in a more complex fashion on our website or other sources that perhaps couldn't provide the type of information that we could provide. So we wanted to provide another medium for our members to learn about COVID-19 and its impact on real estate. And a chatbot made a lot of sense in this use case. But we had to moderate, again, our expectations about what we could deliver because we knew that chatbot technology was at the peak of inflated expectations. So let's talk a little bit about our bot architecture. Now, we leverage Microsoft Azure's bot framework for this chatbot. And this is an example of a bot architecture, much like the one that we use in-house, but there are a couple of things that we do not do in this case. So of course, you have the consumer's mobile device or PC with which they are consuming the chatbot interface. Active Directory is something that we did not implement here because we did not have any authentication on the chatbot. Anybody that went to our website, nar.realtor, was capable of interacting with this chatbot and learning a little bit more about COVID-19 and its impact on real estate. So this is one area where we did not implement any authentication, but of course, should it be necessary, you have the capability of doing so. We had the Azure bot service, which of course we leveraged. Natural language understanding through the Lewis service from Microsoft, which we of course leveraged. Q&A Maker, which allows us to actually assign specific answers to questions. And on the language understanding side, if I wasn't clear, using our more advanced understanding of language to be able to truly understand the questions that are being asked and connect them to the correct answers. Azure App Insights to be able to give us some insights about how folks are actually interacting with the bot, what type of questions are they asking, and whether or not we're actually providing the correct answers to them. And on the bottom portion of this architecture graph, an Azure App Service with Azure Search in a structured SQL database, which we did not implement for this first phase of our chatbot. So I wanted to quickly show you our chatbot, if you don't mind. So this is our chatbot. It's on our website, nar.realtor. It is, of course, a beta version. It was recently implemented, so you have to bear with us in the context of what we have here. But this is our chatbot. And you can see the chatbot identifies itself. It says, I'm a chatbot that answers questions, common questions about COVID-19. In addition, I answer questions about NAR's response to the virus and its impact on real estate. And we notify the user about some examples of things that they can ask. Because of course, if you have a chatbot and you're not quite sure what you can ask it, perhaps the user experience is not that great. You're sitting here and you're like, well, I don't really know what to ask outside of perhaps what is COVID-19. So we provide some suggestions of things that folks can ask. And then we also say, if you struggle with the chatbot and we're not giving you the answers that you need, please call us, because you can speak to a live individual and get the answers that you're looking for. The COVID-19 chatbot is not a medium for communication that is meant to replace other mediums like the website itself, or even calling member support. This is just another mechanism with which we can offer interesting, valid, and relevant information and timely information to our members just in a unique and different way. So I can ask questions like, what is COVID-19? Perhaps I can click on that card and I'll learn a little bit about what is COVID-19. Now, one quick note on this while the answers are loading. This service is built upon an architecture that is at the consumption layer. So if it is not used frequently, the actual service that you operate is going to be shut down. And when it's shut down, you obviously save money. So that's helpful for us. But one of the limitations that you just observed, that is to say, it took perhaps 5 to 10 seconds for a response to come forward. That happens the very first time because the server needs to get hot. Once the server's hot, it will answer questions very rapidly. So of course, I asked, what is COVID-19? And the chatbot responded with some interesting information that is derived from a valid third-party source that can tell us a little bit more about it. So a novel coronavirus that has infected millions of individuals globally. Of course, I can ask questions like, how does it affect real estate? Which is, again, a very specific focus on the real estate impact of COVID-19. So we can ask questions, we can get some answers. Sometimes we get the answers we're looking for, sometimes we're not. But look, here's the really interesting thing about this implementation. It's not perfect. We found a use case that we wanted to leverage in order to make a difference for our members. You can see this question here where I said, how does it affect real estate? It's very generic, being mindful of the Fair Housing Act, not to discriminate people against a particular segment of the population, perhaps even because they have the disease. So a relevant answer, but perhaps we could have done a little bit better with that answer. One of the things that I'd like to get across to folks here in this presentation is not taking action not identifying use cases and trying to deploy those use cases because you fear, again, remember the fear of the unknown, one of the biggest barriers to AI implementation and innovation. It's wrong to fear while not doing the right thing, or doing the right thing is not the right word. I mean to say, to fear the implementation won't work as expected and perhaps fail. That's what I'm trying to say. And therefore, we should avoid doing it. That's not the case. Even if you can build something, get it out there, get it working, understand its limitations, hear from customers about its impact and whether or not it's actually deriving value, that is a significant win to an organization. Doing nothing, in my view, is much worse than doing something and getting this out. And again, this is a beta service that we've developed for our members and that we're continuing to build and to explore and to develop. And we will do so still over the next several months and perhaps even years in order to make it what it really needs to be. And in addition to that, imagine being able to go beyond just a COVID-19 chatbot and actually be able to interact with members and engage with them in other areas of the business too. So perhaps if we added authentication, which we suggested was an option in the Azure architecture that we had proposed, then perhaps what we could do is we could authenticate a member and we can actually handle simple membership questions from them, like updating an address is perhaps a good example of that. So, so again, the chatbot is at the peak of inflated expectations. So of course, we can't expect it to be an end all and be all to get information that folks need about COVID-19 to the member. But it is, again, a great way to get the ball rolling, make an investment, and see if we can go ahead and make a difference and drive value. So I wanted to show you the bot. Feel free, nar.realtor slash COVID-19-chatbot. Interact with it and see where it does well and where it could perhaps use a little bit of work. So let's go forward to the specific lessons learned. So 4 things that we kind of thought about as we were working through, not just the initial use case with the Realtors Conference and Expo, but also the COVID-19 chatbot and our predictive model to better understand whether a member would earn a designation or certification, or our retention prediction model, which tells us how likely a member is to be retained over the next period. In every single one of these projects that leverage one or more AI technologies, we found these 4 things to be critical to our success. First and foremost is collaboration. Success in AI projects starts with cross-functional collaboration. If we did not communicate with the meetings and events team, if we did not communicate with those folks on the business side, perhaps we would not have defined the business problem as well as we could have, and of course, the analytical solution to it. We certainly would have had problems with business implementation because we wouldn't have been able to actually design and develop collaboratively this implementation campaign, especially in the context of the conference and Expo, where we needed to communicate with folks and encourage them to actually attend the conference. You don't want technologists designing your messaging campaigns. Of course, you had to collaborate in order to make that happen. So when you collaborate early in a project, you can make a really, really big difference because all of the people are on board. You understand the limitations, you understand the opportunities, and together you can make a big difference. Second, define. You have to define a very specific problem and identify a corresponding AI solution. And of course, you have to have the right data in order to help solve those problems. So through a nice cross-functional collaborative effort, you're better able to define a specific problem that you can work toward designing an AI solution for. So of course, all of these things go together as well. Third, implementation. So to create value, you have to implement insights within the business, whether it is to modify the decision-making process, enhance or scale the ability to make these complex decisions. Implementation is a big part of that work. So you have to implement your solutions in the business in order to have a chance at deriving real world business value. And our way of implementation in the context of the conference and Expo was to build our predictive model, assign a score to each individual member, develop a campaign around those members who are likely to attend, that spoke to their specific needs and preferences, and of course, actually execute against it and send those campaigns out into the real world, and observe the response rates and, of course, the impact that you're able to draw from a registration perspective. And last but not least, of course, which aligns with business impact, is measurement. You can't manage what you can't measure. You can't make a difference if you're not tracking whether or not you are successful. So you must come up with a way to value the work that's being done from an AI perspective. It's important for future funding purposes. It's important to show your most senior executive peers and staff, those whether it's the CEO or your peers at the senior vice president level or even beyond, that the work that's being done and the investment, even if it's not necessarily financial, significantly financial, perhaps it's more people and process, still there needs to be a way to measure the impact of what it is that you're doing, financial or otherwise, and to be able to use that as a feedback mechanism for the work and, of course, to improve it and to deliver value. So those are the 4 things that we took away from these use cases, and many more that we have in our organization where we leverage techniques in artificial intelligence to make it. With that, I'd like to close. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you to speak here. Thank you for listening to what I have to say. And of course, I'm very happy to take questions from those folks who participated in this event. Whether it's now or after, feel free to connect.
Excellent. Excellent work, Alex. You really made it fascinating. I made some notes. You had a great job making your conversation relevant to most of the attendees in the audience, speaking about homes, conferences, and even your bot architecture because of the domain that we all operate in. We do have one question from Meryl Alpert. Did you combine data governance and AI governance or keep them separate but partnered?
Separate but partnered. This is an interesting question. And I will say that in the context of our work, we are a little bit more mature on the data governance and AI governance side. So of course, for us, we tackle these issues in more of a, we're still growing. So for us, when we think about data governance, we're thinking about, so we have a problem, we have a set of data that of course we were able to identify, we understand the nature of that data based upon our analyses. We know where the limitations are. We know where it's incorrect. We know the adjustments that we need to make to that data, but we don't yet have a system or framework in place to manage and govern the data the way that you normally would in a more mature organization. So for us, we handled data governance and AI governance separately and are still working on building out a solution that is more enterprise scale on the data governance side. But of course, the work that we did when we were talking about identifying the data assets, pulling them all together, dealing with the issues with our data, we have all of that recorded. We know what we need to do. We know how we need to get it done. We just aren't at the level yet where we're capable of doing something at an enterprise level. But that's, of course, our next step.
Excellent. Thank you for that response. And I think we're basically out of time. We really can't field any more questions. But again, thank you very much for your contribution to this amazing lineup of speakers that we've had so far.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and wonderful conference. And I'm excited to be part of it again next year. So thank you very much.
Thank you.